Velkommen alle sammen. Kan I høre mig? Det lyder godt. Når nu vi ikke kan komme til Alsace, så må Alsace jo komme til os. Og det er rigtig dejligt. Så det er godt at se, at der er så mange med på det her. Jeg vil skifte over til engelsk nu, så Olivier også har en chance. Vi kunne selvfølgelig også tage det på fransk, det vil jo være oplagt, men jeg tror, vi er best off med, at vi kører den på engelsk i dag. So, Olivier Humbrecht, nice to see you again. Always a pleasure. We are very excited to taste some of your wines today. We're going to taste 2 Rieslings, 2 Pinot Gris, and 2 Gewurztraminer, all from the vintage 2018. So this is going to be a study of terroir and soils, and Olivier is going to take us through how to say it. This is a study in terroir, and let's see how the grapes are going to interpret these terroirs. So it's a bit tight schedule, Olivier. I hope it's okay. We have to taste 6 wines in 1 hour, but we can do it. I'm sure. So I won't delay any more. So please, Olivier, take it away and please present yourself and your fine wines. Thank you so much. And you have to unmute your mic. And please, of course, all of you, lavpraktisk, lige, og I må gerne slukke kameraer, jeres kamera og jeres mikrofoner, sådan så, og det er helt lavpraktisk, fordi vi vil gerne optage den her session, og det bliver pænest, hvis I slukker jeres kamera også, sådan så at det er Olivier, der ligesom er featured på skærmen under optagelsen. Så gerne sluk kamera og mikrofoner. I er meget velkomne til at skrive spørgsmål i chatten, så tager vi det undervejs, og jeg følger op til sidst også med spørgsmål. Sorry, Olivier, that was just some practical info in Danish.
Okay. I don't mind if people keep the camera on, so I can at least speak to someone and not just speaking to my image in the computer.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry, that's me. I've just asked them to turn off the camera because of the recording. It's going to be better. Yes.
No problem. I'll look at you then.
Yes.
So, welcome to this online tasting of 6 wines of 2018. I will very, very quickly say a few words about the domain and what we are doing on the estate. And of course also speak globally of the vintage 2018. And then we can taste the wines. And I guess people can also ask questions and through the box. And Martin, if you can let me know if there is any questions, I don't mind to answer while we taste and while I speak. It's not a problem at all. So the domain Zind-Humbrecht was created in its current form in 1959 by my parents when they married together. They united 2 very small wine estates from Turckheim and from Gewurztraminer. My father, the Humbrecht side, were in Gewurztraminer, and they were wine growers from father to son since the beginning of the 17th century. So it's a long history. I'm the 12th generation, and my son Pierre-Emile also works now on the estate, mostly into the vineyards and cellars. He's the 13th generation. The Zind family started to make wine during the pre-war period, and my grandfather Zind actually was very innovative because he didn't come from a wine growers family, and he started very early to bottle wines and sell it under his name. The estate in Zind-Humbrecht started with roughly 5 hectares of vineyard mostly from Gewurztraminer and Winsenheim, with two major vineyards, the Grand Cru Hengst and the Grand Cru Goldert. And very quickly, my father in the 60s, 70s, and later myself in the 80s and 90s, we bought vineyards in many great vineyard sites in Alsace to reach today 42 hectares of vineyard land, out of which 38 are producing grapes. 4 are young vines or land resting. We produce roughly, in a normal vintage, when we don't have any problems, around 200,000 bottles of wines, sometimes a little bit more, and sometimes quite a lot less if we have frost problems and things like that. In terms of viticulture, we are biodynamic since the 1998 vintage, when we joined the Biodynamic group, which I am today actually the president. And I can speak through viticulture, maybe when we taste the wines, but basically most of you, I guess, know roughly what is biodynamic farming. It is organic farming where we would use specific preparations, plants. We try to enhance biodiversity by also the use of animals in the vineyards and things like that, like horse plowing and things like this. We also follow a specific calendar to do certain meetings. So you'll be very pleased to know that today is one of the best days in the month to drink wine. We are on the descending moon and on a fruit day. So it's all the planets are aligned for a good tasting, I hope. We also choose the option often to do many work by hand instead of with machines. We have a very large vineyard staff of about 25 people, which is way above what usually you can find in traditional organic farming in the region. Our vineyards are spread over many different villages. We have 5 Grand Cru on the estate, Rangen, Goldert, Hengst, Brand and Sommerberg. Also many single vineyards. You are tasting one single vineyard this afternoon, which is the Pinot Gris Rotenberg. And we also make wines which are from what I would call soil designation types, like we taste a lot this afternoon, Rosh Calcare, Roulée, and so on. In terms of viticulture, it's very easy to understand. We pick the grapes by hand. We bring them to the winery located in Turckheim, which had been designed in 1992 to work a lot by gravity and things like that to minimize the use of pumps and machinery. So the grapes are directly put into the press without any tool, from the buckets directly into the press. The pressing is very long. It takes usually about 12, 14, 18 hours for press cycles to extract a very clear juice at very low pressure. All by gravity goes into settling tanks, and from there it's pumped into our fermentation casks, which are the traditional oak foudre, which range in size from 900 to about 10,000 liters for the biggest ones. Fermentation is done very naturally. We do not add anything to the wine at that stage. So fermentation can take at the shortest 2 or 3 weeks for grapes like Gewurztraminer, for example, but it can also sometimes take up to a year for grapes like Pinot Gris, like Riesling, and other grapes like Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, Muscat can also take a really very long time. The wines are kept on the full lees, the fermenting lees, up to the bottling, which is usually either a year or a year and a half after the harvest. So most of the 18 that you are tasting this afternoon, I'm just looking at my paper not to make a mistake, were bottled in January 2020. Which is a little bit earlier than what we usually do. Usually the bottling is done in March, but we kind of foresee the problem we would have it with COVID last year. And in order to get our corks and bottles in good condition, we decided to make the bottling a couple of months earlier. Only one wine was bottled two wines were bottled, sorry, in August 2019, and these are the two Gewurztraminer. And I can explain later why these wines are usually bottled a little bit earlier. So no racking, no fining, no prefiltrations, and the wines are bottled directly from the leaves, and then they go through a very small cellulose filtration to avoid having sediments in the wine. And also at that stage, we add a little bit of sulfites at that moment. So you can call it an almost natural vinification with nothing added to the wines. We do not block fermentation either, but we try to set the harvest so the wine would have a very good fermentation. So if you want the wines to finish dry, which is usually mostly the case for the kind of wine that you are tasting this afternoon. Yeah, there is only really one wine that has a significant residual sweetness, and that's the last wine of the tasting, and this is voluntary. It's not something that happens by accident. That's it for our technical side. Just a few words on Alsace globally. I don't know if you're interested or not. I always think to understand the wine that we make, it's important to understand globally the region. Alsace is a small or big wine region, depending on how you look at it. It's only 16,000 hectares. So compared to other regions, it's really, really small. But it's, if you want, 5 times bigger than Chablis, okay, to give you a scale, and half the size of Champagne. Most Alsace wines are today white wines, 90%. There is some red wines made in the region. Alsace is the only continental climate in France. We are protected from the oceans by the Vosges Mountains, which means that we get very, very warm summers, colder winters, quite a big amplitude between night and day through the seasons. Last year, for example, in September, we had daily temperatures of 34, 35 Celsius. I know that can make you dream a little bit, perhaps in Denmark, but night times we had temperatures like 8, 9, 10 Celsius, which is actually quite cold. So this amplitude is very interesting for our aromatic grapes, especially grapes like Riesling or Gewurztraminer, because it preserves the fruit quality, it preserves the aromas, and it preserves the acidity, that's certainly one of the reasons why you see so many of these grapes in Alsace and nowhere else in France. Alsace, being continental, is also the driest place in France. Colmar is the driest town in France. It rains more in Marseille, it rains more in Montpellier, it rains more in Perpignan, which a lot of people do not realize. But with an inversion of climate, our dry weather is actually in winter, and in summer we get a little bit more rain. But this rain is often just a few rainstorms, so it's short, it can be quite violent, and we need this rain in summer, otherwise the vines would actually suffer too much from drought, which is one of our biggest issues nowadays. Another characteristic of Alsace is its geological diversity. There are 3 main categories of vineyard. The very old ones, which is from the first era, that's all like acidic soil, like granite, sandstone, volcanic rocks, and things like that. These soils are usually planted with mostly Rieslings, and they have an acidic reaction. The soil has an acidic reaction. The second category is all the soils that were made from sedimentation in the sea. Here you have all the limestone, calcareous, basalt, marl, clay, limestones, more or less old. The older, the poorer, the younger, the richer. And here you find almost all the grape varieties, but you would find mostly the Rieslings on the rocky soils and the Gewurztraminer on the richer, deeper marl or kind of limestones. And then the third category is all the alluvial soil that were made very, very recently in the past million years, where you find gravel, sand, pebbles, this kind of soil, which is the introduction to my first wine, which is the Riesling Roche Roulée 2018. Roche Roulée means rolled stone, or rolling stone, if you prefer, and that's the type of soil which is made by glaciers and rivers. In Turckheim, we have a river that comes out of a deep valley. And this river in the past 500,000 years has left many, many sandy, loam deposits, including big pebbles, sometimes the size of a bucket. And these soils are usually very, very well drained, very, very warm. They also detach a little bit from the mountains, so they get less shadow in the evening. In summer, at least, which means that they are very, very precocious. So, since I see no one, I hope you're all tasting the wines, and let me know if you are at the tasting for the first wine. The 2018 is a pretty rich wine, because 18 was a complicated year. If I can explain it, it's a contrasted year. The beginning was very, very wet. We had a lot of rainfall in April, May and June. We escaped frost. I don't know if you remember, but just like 2021, France had some serious damage of spring frost, but Alsace didn't get any. We were lucky for that, but it was a year where it was very difficult to work during spring because the vineyards were wet. It was hard to have proper sprayings. It was a complicated spring, and having a lot of water also meant that the vines really grew like crazy. So following the work in the vineyard was something that was pretty difficult for our team. And then early July, it changed, and the rain stopped for almost 5 months. And we only had about 100 millimeters of rain over 5 months. July, August, September, October, and November were very, very sunny, lots of light, no clouds. It was a vintage where also we saw the grapes ripening very, very slowly, because these summer conditions meant that, you know, the vine was wasting water in spring, growing like crazy, and that all of a sudden it had to adapt to a much drier and harsher conditions. And many vineyards in Alsace in 2018 had serious drought problems, either because the crop was too big or the growers didn't know how to handle the drought, the lack of water. It's easy to understand what kind of viticulture helps to fight the drought and save water, and what kind of viticulture, on the other way, waste the water into the soil. So the more the soil is compacted, the more you have evaporation. If you don't have grass or cover crops on the ground, the soil also warms up much faster, which means that you also waste too much water. And also, if the vines are hedged aggressively, and the grapes are more exposed to the sunshine, again, there is more perspiration, and the grapes can even burn on the sun if it's too accentuated. We do, I hope, all the right things. We keep our soils very soft. We fight against compaction by using smaller machines. We also do not hedge the vines. We keep the canopy slightly higher to create shadow effect on the other vines. And all these was little details that were very, very important in 2018, especially for grapes like Riesling, which doesn't like too much sunshine, as you know. So it likes good weather, but the grape doesn't like direct sunlight. So shadows and protecting the grapes was a very big issue in 2018. Eventually, the ripening went through very, very slowly. The harvest aging was actually spread over quite a long period, even for us. We started quietly early September and we finished middle of October with a Gewurztraminer grape. And in 18, there is very slow increase of alcohol per week. You know, to gain 1% of alcohol in Riesling grapes in 18, you basically had to wait a month. In 2020, you would gain 1% of alcohol in 2 days in some situations. It just shows you the extreme difference between vintages. So the Riesling Roche Roulée shows that precocity character. It's usually a very generous wine, very forward, easy to understand in terms of aromatic. You really get the Riesling character, you know, really full. You have that fruitiness from the soil. It's not a wine that usually will carry a really big, you know, mineral, petroly character. The acidity is usually quite soft in these vineyards. That shows sometimes more ripeness character than acidity character. It's a wine that will age decently well, but it's not a wine I would recommend to keep for too long, because you will not see too much complexity developing in the wines in 10 years, for example. You know, so I would recommend more this wine in its use than too old, if you know what I mean. Unless you really like the character of you know, older vintages, obviously. I see Martin on the screen.
Yes.
Do you have a question? Yeah.
That means that's a question or two. I would like to ask you, Olivier. You say the Riesling grape doesn't like too much direct sunlight. But does the Rolling Stones, the Roche Roulée, does they keep the warm and reflect the warmth of the sunlight to the grapes indirectly in the vineyards?
Warm is good. Extreme heat is not good.
Yes.
So for that, when you get such really crazy weather. Which actually 18 was not too hot. It just was very dry. You know, it's different. But the drought, the lack of water, increases the sunburn problems. You know, if you walk in very warm conditions, you drink more because you perspire more. And the vine were very stressed by that in 2018. So yes, the stones do reflect the heat. That's why when it's very cold and rainy, we keep the ground more exposed, you know, to the sunlight. But when it's very, very sunny and warm, like it's been the case for the past few years, we let the canopy grow much higher, and the top of the canopy, instead of knitting the branches together, we let them kind of fall a little bit apart. And it creates almost like some kind of umbrella effect on top of the canopy, which means that the soil and the grapes are under the shadow. And automatically, it's like if you stand under a tree, you feel less warm than if you stand under the sun. You know, it's exactly the same effect. And obviously, we allow a little of grass and cover crops and wild plants to grow in the vineyard. And they are not cut, but rolled down. So it creates some kind of mulch on top of the ground. And this mulch also helps to keep the moisture and some freshness into the ground. And you have less of that reflection effect. Yeah. So
we also have a little question from Mass. Do you irrigate the vineyards in dry periods? Is that even allowed in Alsace?
no, it's not allowed.
No, I didn't think so.
It usually in France, irrigation is forbidden on AOC wines, AOC vineyards. Only a few regions today are allowed to irrigate in AOC. It's a few in the Languedoc and Roussillon. But it's a discussion which is today open in Alsace, and it wouldn't surprise me if it might be allowed under some strict conditions in the future. What can I say? Irrigation is...
And maybe, sorry, I just have to a quick translation. Okay. Irrigation, det kunstvanding på dansk, irrigation, vi snakker om nu, og det er altså ikke tilladt i Alsace.
Yeah. Irrigation can be useful because you can say, I would love to have a good rain this weekend. It doesn't come, I open the tap and I water the vineyard, you see. And in these conditions, maybe irrigation could help to make better wines. Unfortunately, it could also have a negative effect because many growers would not make all the effort that they should do to fight for the drought, and they may use irrigation to increase the crop size, you know, and that would be very, very bad for the quality, you know. Water is a drug for the vine. The vines love water. They would like to have a lot of water. And if you plant them in vineyard lands that are usually very rocky and very poor, it's to restrict the amount of water for the vine. Because the more water the vine has, the more it will neglect the ripening of the fruits, you know, and grow too much leaves and branches and wouldn't stop growing. So it's important for us to plant vineyard in drier climates, in soils which are more well drained, to restrict the water. But when the restriction becomes too harsh, when it goes too far, then the plant can go into hydric stress, and that can be a severe problem. So yes, irrigation can help, but it's very, very dangerous. And for that reason, I prefer to sometimes suffer a little bit than allow it. You know, that's my own personal opinion. And the best way to make the vine more resistant to the drought is to limit the production. The less you have grapes, the more the vine is resistant, you know. So we can move to the next wine if you want, which is the Riesling Rosh Calcare 2018. And you can see here you are it's a limestone-based blend that mostly comes from the village of Gewurztraminer, 90% or maybe even more. There is it's a little production of a young vine that comes from the Grand Cru Hengst in 2018 that went into it, but I'm talking maybe just 2 or 3%. The Gewurztraminer vineyard, that's where my father is coming from, and my grandfather. These vineyards were planted in the 60s and 70s for all of them, so they're very mature vineyards nowadays. It's a very, very regular production. What makes it different from the Roche Roulée? Well, it's almost the opposite. Limestone is usually much colder. It contains always a little bit of clay, sometimes a lot, and then we talk about marl in that situation. The soils are also much richer, so the vines are a little bit more vigorous, and the grapes would also grow slightly slower. So usually Riesling that comes from a limestone-based soil contains more acidity, a crisper, more saline type of acidity. You find maybe less floral aromatics and more citrus type of aromas. And especially when the wine ages a little bit, this kind of Riesling can go quite mineral and almost petroly with age. And usually wines from limestone in Riesling also have that structure that allows them to age extremely well. So this wine will age very well. And it's if you lose a bottle or two in the cellar and taste this wine in 10, 15, 20 years, you might have a really, really good surprise. Of course, the wine will be less fruity, citrusy, but and a bit more mineral petrol in that kind of evolution. So if you like that kind of evolution for Riesling, it's really worth it to keep this wine a little bit longer. And I really hope that you can see the major difference between these two wines. The first wine very expressive, very forward, and the second one a bit more restrained, slightly tighter, and crisper also due to the acidity, and more salivation and almost salty kind of finish. Both wines fermented very, very slowly in 2018, a whole year of fermentation. And that's not because they were richer than other ones. On the contrary, Riesling is never the highest alcohol we have in the winery, but the Riesling has a lower pH in the wine and a higher acidity, something that yeast don't like. So when you work with natural wild yeasts, well, they are more receptive to these kind of elements, and the higher the acidity, usually the longer the fermentation. That's a very, very classic scenario for us. So if there are any questions on the wine,
maybe I can ask a question, Olivier. So now we have tasted two very different Rieslings, and we are going to taste some Pinot Gris right now. In a short while, how much do you think of the terroir and the soils and in terms of grape variety? Because I also when I taste your wines, I often find in your Pinot Gris as well as your Rieslings a very distinct acidity and very precise sharpness. Also in your Pinot Gris, which in the textbook should be a little bit less in the acidity, but you always have a very sharp, precise acidity also in your Pinot Gris and in your Gewurztraminer as well. So how much do you think that the grape is only a media of expression of the soils, and how much do you think in grape varieties?
That's a very complex question.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I think any good vineyard or any good viticulture should make it that you can taste the placing to the wine. A wine that doesn't show a region characteristic, a vineyard characteristic, is boring if it's just a grape variety. But there are some soils which would give a stronger character to the wine than others. And in these two first Riesling, it's obvious the sandy valley floor, pebbles, rolled stones are more neutral, and they allow the grape variety to express better. On the second case, limestone have a very, very strong influence. What makes the wines have good acidity and good balance? I'm very happy when we say our wines have very high acidities, but I actually do not think that they have such high acidities. But what you can analyze is sometimes different from what you can taste, you see? And I think that with biodynamic farming, we have seen an increase of acidity over the years, which goes against the logic, because with global warming, every year we should get more alcohol, more sugar in the wine, and less acidity. And it's the opposite. We make drier wines today than we did 20 years ago, and our wines usually have higher acidities. So I think that with biodynamic farming, we are able to make the vines work more efficiently, with less stress and problems, and automatically there is more acidity being synthesized by the leaves, you know, that you can find after in the grapes. But also what I want to say is, what makes you feel that the wine has a good acidity is not just the acidity alone. There are many, many elements into a wine that will act into synergy and make you taste more the acidity in some situations, or less, depending on how the wine is made. And that's something that I see in many biodynamic wines, not just ours, that often people get good comments on their balance in their wines. But in fact, when you analyze the wine, it's not that much higher than other people. It's just that maybe there is things in the wine that combined together, it makes it feel more acid or taste fresher. And there's one element which is important for that. It's the tannins. You know, everybody thinks that only red wines have tannins, and in white wines we don't speak about tannins. But I'm sorry, white and red grapes have a skin, and in that skin you have tannins. And depending on how you work, and if you allow some kind of maceration in the press, for example, I'm not talking about squeezing out the grape, but just taking your time to gently extract the juice. You have some kind of skin macerations that can last, you know, 10, 12, 18 hours. And that extracts a certain amount of high quality polyphenols from the skin, which will participate to the overall texture on the palate and increases the acidity effect, you know. That's the only way I can explain all these phenomena, yeah. So I can actually see a question here for the Rieslings. Have you considered to mix up the different terroirs to achieve a balance between the sweetness and acidity? Well, that's what we do in the Roche series, that in Gewurztraminer we have multiple small terroirs, I don't know how individually they would perform, because we have, it's too small for us to make 8 different wines. But when you are on a very, very strong, powerful single vineyard, you don't want to neutralize that effect into the wine by blending it with something which would be the opposite, you see. If you have a vineyard that you always need to blend with something else because it's too rich and you need to bring acidity from something else, or it's too thin and you need to bring something else that brings power, you're not in a good single vineyard, because a good single vineyard should make a wine on its own, which is very interesting and with a good balance, you see. When you're obliged to make a blend to make a better wine, I think it means that individually the products are less interesting. So for me, they're not of single vineyard quality. I hope what I say makes sense. If I have to mix 2 Grand Cru together to make a better wine, well, for me, these 2 Grand Cru should not be Grand Cru, you see. That's my way to see it. If I constantly have to bring, I don't know, mix Pinot Gris with Riesling because the Riesling is too light, well, then maybe I shouldn't plant Riesling in that space, you know, or I've done something wrong in the vineyard and didn't harvest it ripe enough, you know. That's my philosophy. So Pinot Gris, you have here 2 Pinot Gris that actually come both from limestone based kind of vineyard. Pinot Gris is a grape variety that ripens very, very quickly. It's a grape variety that can build up a lot of sugar in the grapes very quickly. It ripens usually in the same vineyard as if you have Riesling, in the same vineyard as Pinot Gris. Usually the Pinot Gris is ripe anything from 1 to 3 weeks earlier, just to give you an idea. So if I pick up Pinot Gris at 13% potential alcohol, if I would harvest the Riesling the same day, the Riesling would only be maybe at 11 or something like that, you know. Pinot Gris is a fast ripening grape, very dark in color. So it can also sometimes explain why you can see a little bit of color in the wines. Pinot Gris and Gewurztraminer are dark colored skin, Pinot Gris even more than Gewurz. So when you work doing a little of maceration and all this, it's easy to see a certain color developing into the wine, which can be sometimes confusing for people because sometimes in very, very sunny years, you can almost have a little rosé, pink, salmon color to the wine, which can be totally natural into the wine. And it's not at all a sign of default or oxidation or something like that. It's just the way the skin has given a little bit of color to the wine. Here it's not the case because the calcaire soil type is usually quite colder, ripened slower, and you would have maybe less sun influence onto the wine. The first wine, the Rosh Calcare, is a blend of different vineyards, but mostly based on the younger vines that we have in the Clovinsbuhl in Hunavir. Clovinsbuhl is a fabulous vineyard site. We put it at the same level as a Grand Cru. That's our own opinion, but I hope that some of our customers think also the same thing. And when we bought the vineyard in 1987, there were some vineyards already into place that we kept, very good quality old vines that makes the Clovinsbuhl wines. But we also had to pull some out because we felt that some were planted with the wrong rootstock or the wrong clone or not the right density or something like that. So we pulled them out and we planted them in between 89 and 92. So we also planted some Pinot Gris, and that wine is mostly made from these vineyards planted in the early 90s in the Clovinsbuhl. There's a little bit addition of Clojeptal and Heimburg vineyard also in Turckheim, but really it's the Clovinsbuhl which is at the base of the wine. So this wine shows all the limestone characteristic, which means almost a certain austerity. It's not really giving everything today, even though this wine is now in bottle for, I would say, a bit over a year. But it's quite dry, very, quite serious, powerful, tight wine, which will require a bit of aging or a little bit of putting in a carafe and let the air act a little bit. And don't serve this wine too cold also because it might kill its character. So I would say more like 10, 12 Celsius and 4 or 6, if you know what I mean. Definitely no ice buckets. And it's a wine that will develop more and more two types of flavor. You might have more the white fruit, dried fruits kind of character, you know, apricots, these kind of things, but also some nutty, toasty character. Sometimes people, when they taste such wine, they ask me if we use barrels or new oak or something like that. No, we don't buy new oak for that. If we buy a new cask, it's because we had to, you know, destroy an old one that was too old and started to fall apart, and then we replace it. But that's not the case for any of these wines that you're trying today. The nutty character, the toasty character really comes from the lees contact and also the grape variety characteristics, which have that kind of toasty character. When you move to the Rotenberg, then you are here in single vineyard world. And I hope you can appreciate the difference. Rotenberg is a west-facing vineyard on the west side of the Grand Cru Hengst. We are on a very red-colored soil, very rich in iron, which gives a kind of brick red color to the soil. It's very thin, the soil. The topsoil is only maybe 20 centimeters at the maximum, and very quickly the roots grow on the mother rock, which is Oligocene limestone. It's a limestone that was made it's a very interesting soil because it's old limestone rocks, usually oolitic or muschelkalk, which have been rolled into pebbles that were cemented into a limestone sandstone. So it's like double limestone effect, if you want. And these soils are very alkaline. The pH of the soil, for those who know a little bit, is above 9, which makes it extremely aggressive to many, many, many plants. And it also gives a very strong character to the wines. It's also a place where the grapes grow very, very slowly and don't suffer too much from the heat or the sunshine, and always keep a very serious acidity for Pinot Gris. In the Rotenberg, we are not far from a Riesling type of acidity. I hope you can feel that on your palate. It's also a wine that takes a certain time to open up. And definitely, of all the wines that you are tasting today, it's probably the one I would keep the longest in my cellar. And the evolution of aromatics is absolutely fantastic if you give it a few more years. It opens up into really rich candied fruits and things like that, you know, apricots, pear, things like that. And you get that nutty character also developing much stronger with the time. Yeah. It's a very long wine, also lots of salivation. It tastes dry. It's kind of dry for Alsace. It's not technically dry. It's got a few grams of sugar, but it's considered in our classification as a dry wine also, just like the Rosh Calcare Pinot Gris you had before. So here you are on the same geology for the same grape variety, but two classifications, you know, Alsace and single vineyard. Yeah, that's the difference between these two wines. Yeah. I see there is a question, or are there wax on top of the cork? Okay, I don't have it with me because the bottle I opened didn't have any, but on all the bottles, which are the heavier bottles, we put wax on top of the cork because we have, I don't have any one around here now, I would have to go in the cellar. There is bugs, which are like some moss, you know, like the same kind of moss that would lay eggs on wood and eat the wood, and you'll have a wood worm. We have the same thing on the corks, and these worms will eventually eat the cork a little bit, fragilize the corks, and provoke ullage in the bottle. So yes, after some time, it could damage really the wine because you get much more oxidation if you have too much wine missing into the bottle. These moths are a real problem because to get rid of them, it's not easy if you don't want to use chemicals. So there's only really two ways to do it. It's to put machines like the blue light machine that can grill those insects. But we don't like to do this too much because it kills also very good insects, you know, through the year, like spiders and things like that. And so the other way is to protect the cork before it gets the seal in our cellar with some wax. That's why we do it. We don't put wax to protect the wine, for example, from oxidation or something like that. That is totally, people who put wax on top of the bottle is totally useless against oxidation. But it's very efficient to avoid these bugs to go into the cork. That's why we do it. I also love one day to be able to sell my wines without the seal, because it's metal and it's pollution, it's energy which is wasted for me, you know. So, but today, unfortunately, I don't know if there are any sommeliers in the room, but in the audience. But usually, restaurateurs like to see the bottle covered by the seal, to see the name and all these kind of things. But maybe one day the image will change and we can sell our wines without the seal. So the wax will become even more necessary. Yeah. Martin.
Yes, thank you very much, Olivier. So now we have Gewurztraminer. So I know in Italy, Gewurztraminer is very popular grape variety, isn't it? That
Yeah.
so, but here in Denmark, we maybe don't have a history of drinking a lot of Gewurztraminer, but we're looking very forward to tasting these Turckheim and Rosh Calcare, and have you talk us through why. What is it with this grape? It's very potential and high alcohol and lots of tannins and all this. So we're looking forward to.
It's a grape variety which is a bit like Marmite. You love it or you hate it. You know, it's that kind of wine. Usually it divides people, but it doesn't leave people in it, without opinion. So Gewurztraminer is a grape which is actually quite bizarre. It's extremely aromatic, very small clusters. The beautiful old selections that we reproduce on our estate, any vineyard we plant now, we select from old vines, our own plants. We don't buy clones. Have a beautiful dark orange red color. Small clusters, small berries, very, very tough skin. It's a grape variety which is which is very tasty, but very difficult to eat. It's like eating a small kirsch cherry. You have skin and pips and not much juice into it, you know. So the importance of the skin is crucial in Gewurztraminer, because that's where you have the taste and the character of the wine, and also a lot of tannins. I always say the joke that Gewurztraminer is a travestite of red wine, because there's all the characteristics of a red wine: high tannins, lower acidity, lots of phenols, lots of total phenols into the wines, but it is white, and sometimes it can be sweet, you know. So to grow Gewurztraminer properly, we have to look at it almost like a red wine. So the importance of the ripeness of the skin is super important. If Gewurztraminer is not fully ripe, it develops very perfumey aromatics. But sometimes they can be too much, you know, like a cheap perfume. I always say also like a toilet deodorant, for example. You have these very strong geranium aromatics and cheap flowers, which is almost vulgar sometimes. You get this when the skins are not properly ripe, just like you get these very perfumey Sauvignon Blanc when they are harvested not ripe and can be too aggressive and not very refined, you know. Same thing for Muscat. Any grape which is very aromatic, when they're not properly ripe, you get that perfumey character which can be described as a bit vulgar. So we harvest the Gewurztraminer very, very ripe. We have very small yield into our wines. And also we optimize extraction of the skin through long skin contact in our press. It's a grape variety that we press the longer. So the color extraction can be quite important. And I'm sure you can see this in the wine in the first Gewurztraminer, the Turckheim 18. And you can also feel on the palate, because it's bone dry, it doesn't have any sugar at all, very, very powerful tannins. If you measure the tannin in this wine, you probably are equivalent to unoaked red Burgundy in kind of comparison, between 800 to 1200 ppm of total phenols, which is pretty high for a normal white wine. So Turckheim is a little bit like the Roche Roulée. It's a part, we would choose our oldest vines into our Roche Roulée range, and these vines were planted are between 30, 40, 45 years old to produce this wine. It's also on this sandy, loam, silt, pebbles, gravels kind of soil. So very warm, very dry soil. It's similar to the first Riesling, except the Riesling is planted a little bit more into the deeper soil. The Gewurztraminer are on the warmer soils. Gewurztraminer is also a grape that needs a lot of sunshine and some kind of heat to ripen properly. That's why it's a very, very tricky grape to grow. And usually vintages where it rains during harvest or before harvest don't make a very good Gewurztraminer. You can make a good Riesling under almost bad weather, but with Gewurztraminer you need sunshine, especially the 2 or 3 weeks before the harvest. If you don't have a minimum of heat and sunlight and sunshine, it's not good. So this one is being bone dry, quite extracted. You have an aromatic which is more towards the spice than towards the floral character, you see. And because it's not overripe, you don't have any botrytis or noble rot. You don't get also the kind of aromatics you get in the second one, which is much more like exotic fruits and, you know, beeswax and this kind of characteristic. I mean, even myself, quite surprised because the bottle I just opened. I don't know if you have the corks. If you got, see, some of you have the cork in front of you, but I don't know if you see it. That's the end that was outside of the bottle, okay, clean. That's the end that was in contact with the wine. Look how dark it is. And when I opened it, I said, oh, they brought me the wrong bottle. They brought me a red wine. In fact, no, it's the tannins of the Gewurztraminer that tainted the cork almost like a red wine. It's absolutely amazing, you know. And this is what makes this wine. I can understand that some people don't like it, but because most people are used to have a sweet Gewurztraminer or see some sweetness in the Gewurztraminer. This one is bone dry. I'm sure if you taste it blind, without seeing the color, you might not even think it's a white wine. You might go maybe for a red wine. It's an experiment which is very interesting to do. And it being so dry with such strong tannins, just like when you drink a red wine, you need food to go with it. And more than any of the other wines, I would think. And the 4 first wine, I can very, very happy drink them without food. I would love them with food also, but I can drink them without food, like aperitif, I have no problem with it. This, my body is asking for food, you know, and something more spicy, maybe something like cheese or something like that, or charcuterie or smoked food or something like that. And then something also maybe fatty, and then it will probably taste easier than drinking it like this, being so dry. So, voilà. And again, the color comes really from that maceration on the skin. I'm not making orange wine, okay? It's not at all something that I actually would go for, but it's easy to understand that if you take 18, 20 hours to press grapes that are quite colored, you can end up with a slightly darker color into the wines, especially in vintages where you have a lot of sunshine and the skins are super, super, super ripe and harvested slightly later, you know, hence the style of this wine. Yeah. I see some questions about decanting. Yes, we do what I would call a very reductive vinification, meaning we leave the wines on the fermenting leaves, the gross leaves, which are very reductive. They eat all the oxygen coming into the wines, which is a good thing because it allows me to allow more oxygen to go into the cask without seeing oxidation. And that is good to stabilize the wine because these fragile oxidative elements into the wines, which is mostly colloids, you want to precipitate them before you bottle the wine. Because if you keep them into the wine, well, eventually they will oxidate the wine later. So you want this kind of oxido-reductive aging in the cask. The full leaves allow me to do this without having to use too much sulfur. So, which is good, you know, eventually at the end. So when we bottle wines, and put them again into something reductive, which is a bottle of wine with no oxygen, except a little bit what's in the cork that goes into the wine. They do need air for that, and putting into a carafe, depending the wine, the vintage, and the style of wine, definitely helps, especially for wines like the Pinot Gris Rotenberg, for example, or the Riesling Calcaire. That's the kind of wine which I would really see benefiting from a certain time into a carafe. You know, I see a question about the Gewürz and oak. All our wines ferment, and the élevage is done into traditional oak casks, but these oak casks are very old. If we buy a new one, it's usually our blend of Chardonnay and Auxerrois called Zind that we put into it, which is the wine that takes the best, the small influence of the new oak. And Riesling and Gewurztraminer never into new oak. It doesn't go well together. It really doesn't go well together. Gewürz is already a very tannic wine, so why would I want to add more tannins from the wood and alter the aromatic character? The smokiness that you get is the kind of smokiness you get from Gewürz when it becomes very, very spicy. You know, like I said before, early harvested Gewürz can be very perfumey. You have a lot of geranium kind of aromatics. Then when you get noble rot, it moves towards exotic fruits, more like, you know, lychee or mango kind of aromatics. But also sometimes when it's very dry and you don't have the botrytis or the over-ripeness character, then it gets very, very peppery and smoky in character. You know. So the last Gewurztraminer, which is the Riesling Roche, the Gewurztraminer Rosh Calcare, same vintage, totally different, you know, in style. Here it comes mostly from vineyards in Gewurztraminer, where we add a lot of selection that we do in our Grand Cru, limestone Grand Cru we have on the estate. So we go in the old vines of Hengst and Winsbühl, and also Goldert, and pick the vines which are, you know, these vineyards are very old. So anything that we replaced into the vineyards, which can be, you know, 10, 20, 25 years old, the trunks are much smaller, about this diameter. The old vines can be big like this. So these younger vines are also picked and blended into this wine. It's a wine that has a very, very good pedigree in terms of vineyard origin, relatively aggressive limestone, like, you know, Oligocene, Muschelkalk, Oolitic, and much deeper, much colder. When these grapes ripen, they can go really high in the ripeness level to a point where the wine cannot ferment dry. You know, a wine like this, it's impossible to get it dry. The alcohol will be crazy, you know. So it's around 40 grams of sugar, index 4. We have an index system on our label. For those of you who have a bottle in front of you, you can see below the alcohol level. It's written, for example, on this label here. You see indice that goes from 1 to 5. 5 is above 45 grams of sugar, which is a sweet category in Europe. Dry is below 9 grams of sugar, and 2, 3, 4 is spread between 9 and 45 grams of sugar. So this one, I think, should be number 4, if I remember well. I didn't check. But it's around 40 grams of sugar, something like that. And so you have a very unctuous, sweet element, much stronger acidity, mouthfeel. That's the effect of the limestone. You know, limestone vineyard is where you usually find the highest acidity, whatever the grape variety is. And because this one also has a little bit of overripe character, with a tiny, tiny little influence of maybe botrytis, but really, really very ripe skin, the flavor profile is completely different than the previous wine. It's also a wine that really, I would say, could benefit from a bit more aging. And the more you age a sweet Gewurztraminer, it will taste slightly drier as the years go by, you know, which makes them, I think, more interesting than to go with food. Yeah. I see questions. Why isn't Vinsmagning Grand Cru? Well,
yeah, that's exactly my question as well. Why isn't Vinsmagning a Grand Cru?
Well, there is, I think it's mostly a political answer, because at the time of the classification in the 1970s and early 80s, the Vinsmagning belonged to a lady that wasn't cultivating the vineyard, and the vineyard were rented by someone who was selling the grapes to the local co-op. And at the time, co-ops and négociants who were buying grapes, well, they didn't want those vineyards to become Grand Cru, because it would mean that they would have to pay the grapes 2 or 3 times the price, you know. So it was a bit cheeky from the cooperative not to warn the owner that wasn't living there. She was an old lady, so she was a little bit misinformed, if you know what I mean. So it was very naughty from the co-op at the time not to tell the owner, well, you should apply for Grand Cru, you know. She didn't know, so it wasn't done. Saying that, if the vineyard had been classified Grand Cru, maybe I couldn't have afforded to buy it also, you know, in 1987. So I'm not complaining too much. Also, at the time, no vineyard that was a monopoly was classified Grand Cru, because the doctrine, the philosophy of the INAO at the time was that they needed to see the production from different growers to estimate the quality and the character of the vineyard, you know. So as far as I'm trying to look, there's no Grand Cru vineyard which is a monopoly in Alsace, also for that reason. So the Vinsmagning had 2 major reasons why it was not Grand Cru. Today we have a Premier Cru classification undergoing in Alsace. That will probably take another 10 years before it's finished. I don't know how many Premier Cru will be classified at the end. Maybe it'll be done in different stages. And the first stage probably would be maybe 25, 30 vineyards. I like another famous estate in Bordeaux. I would say if I cannot be first, at least I'll try to be the best of the second, you know. So I think the Vinsmagning would be in that position, yeah.
Well, Olivier, thank you so much for giving us insight in your fine wines and different grape varieties and different terroirs. It's always a pleasure. So if there are any more questions, we have another one from Mads. Do you think it's possible to do Alsace grapes in Denmark? Oh, I know, Olivier, you and I talked about wine growing in Denmark before. So what do you think?
Complicated.
Yes.
Obviously you have global warming, but yeah, I would think that it's not just the heat that you have to achieve, but you also need the sunshine. Too much water is not good. You also need to have a certain kind of drainage capacity in the soils. When you are in a more rainy climate, and for drainage you need slopes. To have slopes you need altitudes. So when I always joke with you and I say, what's your highest mountain in Denmark? You say it's like 50 meters or 100 meters. I say, how can you have a proper slope when your highest place is just barely above sea level? You know, so all these reasons makes it very, very difficult. So maybe you can compensate drainage by having very gravelly, sandy soil. You know, so you have the water penetrates into the ground, and this soil also warm up quicker. So it would be maybe more interesting to plant vineyards on that kind of soil, but these soils don't have much character also, you know. So it's unfortunately, I think there is many places in the world that could be interesting to develop new vineyard. I don't think Denmark is on the top of the list, you know, unfortunately. And it pains me to say it, but I'm sure when you go north of France, I'm sure there are more places, maybe in some parts of England, for example, that could be more interesting because of the soil, the slopes, the limestone they have, and these kind of things, you know, unfortunately. Or on other continents, you know, like Canada, for example, and places like that. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna be patient with our Danish wines then.
Yeah.
For your input.
Or to bring someone like Napoleon and make a mountain of basalt, for example, and grow grapes onto it.
We need some slopes. We need some slopes for the drainage and the direction of the sun. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Olivier, thank you so much for taking us through your 6 great wines. And if you have any more questions, please write them down, or you're welcome to unmute and ask Olivier directly. Or else I will bid you all a very good weekend.